Have you ever wondered why some of the most powerful symbols in human history are those that have been most misunderstood? Today, we're going to explore a controversial yet fascinating perspective that challenges everything you thought you knew about cultural reclamation and spiritual identity. The story begins not with darkness, but with light, the very meaning of the name Lucifer itself. What if I told you that for some communities, particularly within Black cultural movements, this symbol represents not evil, but liberation? Bereshit, in the beginning, there was a different understanding, one that predates colonial interpretations and reaches back to ancient wisdom traditions across continents. When European colonizers encountered the rich spiritual practices of Africa, they often labeled what they didn't understand as demonic. But what happens when a people reclaim the very symbols used to oppress them? This is not simply about religious interpretation, but about the profound human journey toward cultural restoration and spiritual sovereignty. Let's examine how this complex symbol has been transformed into a powerful metaphor for Black cultural renaissance across art, literature, spirituality, and social movements. The journey we're about to undertake will challenge assumptions, explore forgotten histories, and perhaps, most importantly, reveal how symbols can be powerful tools for healing collective trauma. Whether you agree with this interpretation or not, understanding it offers profound insights into how marginalized communities reclaim their narrative. So join me as we explore this provocative topic with open minds and hearts ready to understand perspectives different from our own. When we look at the historical context of how Lucifer became intertwined with Black cultural reclamation, we must first understand the colonial framework that necessitated such a radical reinterpretation. During the era of slavery and colonization, European powers systematically dismantled African spiritual systems, labeling indigenous practices as devil worship to justify their suppression. This wasn't merely cultural misunderstanding, it was a deliberate strategy to break spiritual resistance and impose a new religious order that reinforced subjugation. Consider the words of Exodus 23:3, "You shall have no other gods before me." This commandment, taken out of context, became a weapon to delegitimize African spiritual traditions that often honored multiple deities or ancestral spirits. The colonial powers positioned themselves as bringing light to darkness, a profound irony given that Lucifer's name literally means light, bringer or morning star in Latin. HaKodesh Barzil, the sacred iron of truth, was being bent and reshaped to serve oppressive ends. Some contemporary Black scholars argue that reclaiming Lucifer as a symbol represents a profound act of decolonization by embracing the very figure used to demonize their ancestral practices. They invert the power dynamic. As Professor James Cone wrote, when the oppressed take symbols of their oppression and transform them into emblems of liberation, they engage in the most profound form of resistance. This perspective doesn't necessarily endorse Satanism as understood in Western contexts, but rather reclaims the archetype of the rebel against unjust authority. The question becomes, can a symbol so deeply associated with evil in the Western imagination be effectively reclaimed? The Bible itself presents a complex picture. Isaiah 14:12 states, "How you have fallen from heaven, morning star, son of the dawn." This passage, often cited as referring to Lucifer, actually describes the fall of a Babylonian king. The connection to Satan came much later through medieval interpretations. Some black theologians point to this historical misreading as evidence that reclamation is not only possible, but historically justified. During the transatlantic slave trade, enslaved Africans were often forbidden from practicing their native religions. Many adopted Christianity, but often infused it with hidden elements of their ancestral practices, a phenomenon scholars call syncretism. These syncretic traditions, like voodoo in Haiti or candomblé in Brazil, were routinely demonized as devil worship despite their profound spiritual complexity. By reclaiming Lucifer, some argue they are simply completing a circle of resistance that began centuries ago with their ancestors. Emet v. Immuna, a truth and faith, sometimes require us to look beyond conventional interpretations to find deeper meaning. This historical reclamation doesn't exist in isolation. It connects to broader movements of decolonizing religious thought across the African diaspora. As one Yoruba elder stated, when they called our Orishas demons, they taught us to fear our own divine heritage. Reclaiming these symbols is reclaiming our spiritual birthright. This perspective invites us to consider what other aspects of spiritual heritage have been distorted through colonial lenses, and what healing might be possible through reclamation. The realm of black art and literature has been particularly fertile ground for the reinterpretation of Lucifer as a symbol of cultural restoration. In these creative spaces, Lucifer often appears not as the embodiment of evil, but as a complex figure representing rebellion against oppressive systems, the pursuit of knowledge, and the reclamation of power. This artistic reimagining creates a profound dialogue between traditional religious symbolism and the lived experience of black communities seeking liberation. In Toni Morrison's masterpiece, Song of Solomon, the character of Guitar embodies Luciferian qualities, questioning authority, seeking justice outside established systems, and ultimately pursuing a form of forbidden knowledge. Morrison doesn't explicitly invoke Lucifer, but the parallels reveal how deeply this archetype resonates with narratives of black resistance. As Guitar tells the protagonist, "Everything I do is to protect our people. It's about love." This complex moral positioning echoes Lucifer's own justifications in Milton's Paradise Lost, where he famously declares, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven." Ahavat Olam, eternal love, sometimes manifests in ways that challenge conventional morality. The Afrofuturist movement has particularly embraced Luciferian imagery as a tool for reimagining black futures. In Octavia Butler's Parable series, the protagonist Lauren Alamina creates a new religion called Earthseed that emphasizes change as the only constant. God is change. While not explicitly Luciferian, this radical theological innovation echoes Lucifer's role as the challenger of static divine order. Butler's work suggests that spiritual revolution may be necessary for black liberation, a theme that resonates with Lucifer's own rebellion against what he perceived as divine tyranny. Visual artists like Kahind Wiley have subtly incorporated Luciferian imagery into portraits celebrating Black excellence. Wiley's famous paintings place contemporary Black subjects in poses borrowed from classical European art, often with subtle references to the fallen angel motif, beautiful. Powerful figures surrounded by lush gardens reminiscent of Eden. This visual coding suggests that what dominant culture might label as fallen or sinful can be reinterpreted as glorious and divine, as Psalms 118:222 reminds us. The stone the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. In music, particularly within hip, hop and jazz traditions, Luciferian references have become a powerful metaphor for Black genius operating outside approved systems. When Kendrick Lamar raps, "Lucy gonna call you even when Lucy know you love your father," he's exploring the complex relationship between rebellion and tradition that many Black artists navigate. Similarly, when Sun Ra named his jazz ensemble the Orchestra, combining arc and orchestra, he was consciously positioning Black musical innovation as a vessel for salvation outside traditional religious frameworks. Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, moves through unexpected channels. The poetry of Amiri Baraka often employed Luciferian imagery to challenge white supremacist structures. In his poem Black Art, he writes of a poetry that kills oppressive forces, a destructive creativity that parallels Lucifer's role as both destroyer and creator. This duality speaks to the complex position of Black artists who must sometimes tear down before they can build anew. As Romans 14:13 cautions, "Therefore let us stop passing judgment on one another," reminding us that what appears destructive may serve a higher purpose. These artistic explorations aren't merely provocative for shock value. They represent sophisticated theological and philosophical engagements with questions of power, morality, and liberation. When Black artists invoke Luciferian imagery, they often do so to explore what theologian James Cone called the paradox of the oppressed, how to resist evil without becoming evil, how to claim power without replicating oppression. This nuanced approach transforms Lucifer from a simple villain into a complex symbol of the human struggle for dignity and self-determination. The reinterpretation of Lucifer has found particularly fertile ground in contemporary Black spiritual movements seeking alternatives to what many view as colonial religious frameworks. These movements don't necessarily worship Lucifer in the conventional sense, but rather engage with this figure as a metaphor for spiritual sovereignty and the reclamation of demonized African traditions. This approach represents a radical departure from both traditional Christianity and conventional Satanism, creating a unique spiritual paradigm centered on liberation. Some young Black spiritual practitioners have formed communities that explicitly reject what they call slave master religion, the version of Christianity used to justify enslavement and colonization. Instead, they explore pre-colonial African spiritual systems, often finding parallels between demonized African deities and the Lucifer narrative. As one practitioner explains, "When they told our ancestors that Eshu was the devil, they were criminalizing our connection to divine trickster energy that brings necessary change." This perspective sees Lucifer not as Satan, but as a misunderstood archetype, representing transformation and divine intelligence. Chachmat Halev, wisdom of the heart, sometimes requires us to look beyond surface interpretations. These spiritual communities often practice rituals focused on healing ancestral trauma and reclaiming spiritual technologies lost during colonization. One such ritual involves shadow work, confronting the parts of oneself and one's culture that have been rejected or demonized. By symbolically embracing Lucifer as the ultimate shadow, practitioners believe they can integrate fragmented aspects of their heritage and psyche. This approach resonates with Psalm 23:4. Even though I walk through the darkest valley, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. The darkness becomes not something to fear, but a space for profound transformation. Online communities have become crucial spaces for these emerging spiritual movements. Platforms like TikTok and Instagram feature Black spiritual teachers sharing perspectives on Lucifer as a liberatory figure, often using hashtags like A Lucifer Liberation or Decolonize Spirituality. These digital spaces allow practitioners to connect across geographical boundaries, creating global networks of spiritual exploration outside institutional control. As Proverbs 4:23 advises, the beginning of wisdom is this: get wisdom. Though it cost all you have, get understanding. These communities prioritize understanding over dogma. Critics within traditional Black religious communities express concern about these movements, seeing them as dangerous departures from faith traditions that sustained Black communities through centuries of oppression. Reverend William Barber, 2EI, has cautioned, "We must be careful not to abandon the very spiritual tools that gave our ancestors strength." This tension reflects broader debates about how best to honor ancestral wisdom while addressing the colonial aspects of inherited religious traditions. Emet Miret's Titzmak, truth springs from the earth, suggesting that authentic spirituality must be grounded in lived experience rather than imposed doctrine. Some practitioners synthesize elements of Christianity with reclaimed African traditions, creating syncretic practices that honor both lineages. They point to biblical passages like John 8:32. "Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free," arguing that spiritual liberation requires honest engagement with all aspects of one's heritage, including those demonized by colonial powers. This approach sees Lucifer not as an entity to worship, but as a symbol of the human right to question authority and seek deeper truth. The relationship between these spiritual movements and broader Black liberation struggles is complex. Some activists see spiritual decolonization as inseparable from political liberation, arguing that mental and spiritual sovereignty must precede physical freedom. As Malcolm X famously stated, "You can't separate peace from freedom, because no one can be at peace unless he has his freedom." For these practitioners, reclaiming Lucifer represents a declaration of spiritual independence, the freedom to define divinity on their own terms. These movements raise profound questions about religious authority, cultural reclamation, and spiritual authenticity. They challenge us to consider who has the right to determine which spiritual symbols are sacred or profane. Can symbols be redeemed from their historical associations? And perhaps most importantly, what does true spiritual liberation look like for communities healing from historical trauma? The symbolism of Lucifer has increasingly appeared in black social and political movements, functioning as a provocative metaphor for resistance against systemic oppression. This usage extends beyond spiritual contexts into the realm of political discourse, where Luciferian imagery becomes a tool for challenging power structures and articulating radical visions of liberation. The appearance of such symbolism often generates controversy, but also creates powerful opportunities for dialogue about the nature of resistance. During some Black Lives Matter protests, activists have employed Luciferian imagery to highlight what they see as the demonization of black resistance. Signs reading, "If fighting for justice makes me a devil, so be it," directly confront the historical tendency to label black liberation movements as dangerous or evil. This strategic reclamation transforms stigma into strength, similar to how 1 Corinthians 1:3-7 notes that God chose the foolish things of the world to shame the wise. God chose the weak things of the world to shame the strong. Gevura, strength, sometimes comes from embracing what others fear. Some political theorists within black radical traditions have explicitly drawn parallels between Lucifer's rebellion against divine hierarchy and the struggle against white supremacy. As one activist wrote, "When the system positions whiteness as divine and blackness as its antithesis, rebellion becomes not just political but cosmological." This framing positions anti-racist activism as a necessary challenge to an unjust cosmic order, similar to how Lucifer challenged what he perceived as divine tyranny. This perspective doesn't endorse evil, but rather questions who gets to define what is good and evil in the first place. The use of Luciferian imagery in political contexts has generated significant backlash, both from religious conservatives and from within black communities. Critics argue that such symbolism plays into dangerous stereotypes and alienates potential allies. As Ephesians 6:12 reminds us, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world." Some faith leaders caution that while fighting injustice is righteous, the symbols we choose matter. Educational initiatives focused on black cultural history sometimes incorporate discussions of how Lucifer and other demonized figures have been used to suppress African spiritual traditions. These educational efforts aim to help students understand the political dimensions of religious symbolism and develop critical thinking about how spiritual narratives can reinforce or challenge power structures. As Jesus taught in John 8:30-32, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." This educational approach sees historical understanding as essential for liberation. Torah High, this is the teaching. That liberation requires understanding the roots of oppression. Some political artists create visual works that deliberately juxtapose Luciferian imagery with symbols of black resistance. Murals depicting black revolutionaries with subtle angelic or demonic features challenge viewers to question their assumptions about good and evil in political contexts. These works often reference biblical passages like Isaiah 5:20, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness," suggesting that dominant moral frameworks may themselves be inverted. This artistic strategy invites viewers to consider whose interests are served by particular moral narratives. The intersection of Luciferian symbolism with political movements raises profound questions about the relationship between spiritual and political liberation. Some activists argue that decolonizing the mind and spirit must precede political freedom, making symbolic reclamation an essential part of liberation work. As Audre Lorde famously stated, "The master's tools will never dismantle the master's house." By this logic, creating new symbolic languages, or radically reinterpreting existing ones, becomes necessary for imagining truly liberated futures. These political applications of Luciferian symbolism don't exist in isolation from broader traditions of resistance. They connect to historical examples of oppressed groups reclaiming demonized identities. From the Haitian Revolution's embrace of Vodou to the Black Power movement's rejection of respectability politics. Each generation finds new symbolic languages to articulate their struggle while building on the foundations laid by their ancestors. As Ecclesiastes 1:9 observes, "What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun." The reinterpretation of Lucifer as a symbol of Black cultural restoration has generated diverse and often polarized reactions across society. These responses reveal deeper tensions about religious authority, cultural ownership, and the politics of symbolism. By examining these reactions, we gain insight not only into this specific phenomenon, but also into broader questions about how cultures evolve, adapt, and heal from historical trauma. Within traditional Black churches, reactions have ranged from outrage to thoughtful engagement. Some pastors condemn these reinterpretations as dangerous spiritual rebellion, citing 2 Corinthians, "Wellesan 3:4, and no wonder, for Satan himself masquerades as an angel of light." They argue that regardless of intellectual justifications, engaging with Luciferian symbolism opens spiritual doorways better left closed. Other religious leaders take a more nuanced approach, acknowledging the legitimate grievances behind such reinterpretations while suggesting alternative paths to cultural healing. As one AME church elder reflected, "I understand the pain driving this reclamation, but we must be careful not to abandon the faith that sustained our ancestors through unimaginable suffering." Emuna Shalama, complete faith, sometimes requires difficult conversations about tradition and innovation. Academic institutions have become important forums for analyzing this cultural phenomenon. University departments of religious studies, African American studies, and cultural anthropology increasingly offer courses examining the reinterpretation of Lucifer within broader contexts of decolonial thought. These academic explorations provide historical context that helps students understand that symbol reclamation is not unique to Black communities, but has precedence across cultures recovering from colonization. As Proverbs 18:15 advises, "The heart of the discerning acquires knowledge, for the ears of the wise seek it out." These scholarly conversations help transform knee-jerk reactions into informed understanding. Media coverage of Luciferian symbolism in Black cultural movements often sensationalizes the topic, focusing on the most provocative examples while ignoring nuanced theological and philosophical underpinnings. This sensationalism can reinforce stereotypes and fear rather than promoting understanding. As James 1:19 counsels, everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Some Black media outlets have responded by creating more thoughtful coverage that contextualizes these symbolic reclamations within longer histories of spiritual resistance and cultural healing. The global impact of this symbolic reclamation extends far beyond American borders. In post-colonial African nations, similar conversations are unfolding about reclaiming demonized indigenous spiritual practices. In Brazil, practitioners of Candomblé find resonance with North American discussions about Lucifer, seeing parallel processes of demonization and reclamation. These global connections create solidarity networks among communities engaged in similar work of cultural restoration. Olam Chized Yaibeni, the world is built through kindness, including the kindness of mutual recognition among those engaged in parallel struggles. Young people, particularly those active on social media platforms, have been especially receptive to these reinterpretations. For a generation already questioning inherited religious frameworks, Luciferian symbolism offers a provocative language for expressing dissatisfaction with traditional institutions. TikTok videos exploring Lucifer as liberation regularly garner millions of views, creating virtual communities where these ideas can be explored outside institutional control. As Ecclesiastes 7:10 cautions, do not say, "Why were the old days better than these?" For it is not wise to ask such questions. These young voices remind us that spiritual evolution has characterized every generation. The artistic legacy of this symbolic reclamation continues to evolve in unexpected directions. Contemporary Black artists increasingly incorporate Luciferian themes into mainstream cultural products, from best-selling novels to streaming television series, subtly normalizing these reinterpretations for broader audiences. This mainstreaming raises questions about whether radical symbolism loses its power when absorbed into commercial culture. As Matthew 5:13 warns, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again?" The tension between radical expression and cultural co-optation remains unresolved. Looking toward the future, the question becomes whether this symbolic reclamation represents a temporary cultural moment or the beginning of a lasting shift in how these symbols are understood. Some scholars predict that as Black communities continue healing from historical trauma, the need for provocative symbolic inversions may diminish. Others suggest that these reinterpretations mark a permanent expansion of religious imagination that will continue to evolve in response to changing social conditions. As Isaiah 43:9 proclaims, "See, I am doing a new thing. Now it springs up, do you not perceive it?" The diverse reactions to Lucifer as a symbol of Black cultural restoration ultimately reveal something profound about the power of symbols themselves. They are never static. Their meanings evolve as communities reinterpret them to address current needs and heal historical wounds. This process of reinterpretation is not unique to Lucifer or to Black communities. It represents the fundamental way that human cultures adapt and survive through changing circumstances. The reinterpretation of Lucifer within Black cultural movements raises profound theological questions that extend far beyond simple religious controversy. This reclamation challenges fundamental assumptions about good and evil, authority and rebellion, and the right to define one's spiritual identity. It invites us to reconsider how historical narratives shape contemporary beliefs and how communities can heal by reclaiming their stories. Whether you view Lucifer as a symbol of liberation or a dangerous misstep, this phenomenon underscores the enduring power of symbols to shape culture and inspire change. It reminds us that even the most vilified figures can become beacons of hope for those seeking to redefine their place in the world. The diverse reactions to Lucifer as a symbol of Black cultural restoration ultimately reveal something profound about the power of symbols themselves. They are never static. Their meanings evolve as communities reinterpret them to address current needs and heal historical wounds. This process of reinterpretation is not unique to Lucifer or to Black communities. It represents the fundamental way that human cultures adapt and survive through changing circumstances.